All right. Well, good evening and welcome to the Cedar Falls Planning and Zoning Commission for this Wednesday, August 26th, 2020. We're again holding our meeting by video conference, and if you need any assistance joining the meeting, it can be found on the city's website on Planning and Zoning under our agenda. There's a number of ways to connect if you have any problems and would like to participate. Please check there for information. We'll start tonight's meeting with roll call, and tonight we have Stephanie Hochschietz standing in for Karen Howard. So Stephanie, would you take the roll, please?
I hope I do it justice. So good evening, everyone. All right, Adkins, looks like she's absent tonight. Hartley?
Here.
Holst?
Here.
Larson?
Here.
Leeper?
Here.
Lynch?
Here.
Prideaux?
Here.
Saul?
Here.
Schrod?
Here.
Great, thank you. The first item of business would be the approval of minutes from the August 12th, 2020 meeting. Is there any corrections or a move to approve?
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor signify by aye.
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 So that motion carries. Our next item of business would be any public comments. I'm looking, we only have one attendee showing up right now. If you're interested in a public comment that's not related to the business on the agenda tonight, please raise your hand. Seeing none on that, we will move on to old business. And tonight we have one item of old business, and that is a subdivision code tax amendment for Division 3 final plats. And who's going to introduce that tonight?
I will.
Okay, Stephanie,
Let me share my screen here and get the presentation up. Let's see here. All right, can everybody see the presentation? Okay.
Yes.
Very good. All right. Well, the commission considered this at their last meeting. Karen Howard gave an overview, so I will just touch on a couple points of the presentation from last time, just in case we have new people joining us, or just to kind of refresh everybody as we move forward on consideration about this. In the packet that's available online, the staff report was available there, and this is a summary of some of the information in that report. As Karen Howard covered last time, the purpose of the subdivision code is related to establishing some minimum standards for the design, development, and improvement of subdivisions as the city continues to develop and as we create those lots. And so just to kind of move through quickly some of the points that were discussed last time, Karen Howard went over the process for subdivision platting. It's a kind of a two-step process where first there's the preliminary plat, and listed here on this slide are a number of areas that we review when we look at a preliminary plat. We're looking at that layout of the streets and the lots. We're looking at public infrastructure, which includes not only the streets, but utilities. Looking at the impact to sensitive environmental features. How does this fit into the larger community and the neighborhoods as we're trying to continue logical and orderly development of the city overall? How are we protecting the interests of our current property owners as well as future property owners? So we're just looking to ensure all of those goals are met when we look at a preliminary plat. Then we move into the second step of a final plat, and that's where we might see smaller pieces of the puzzle. So a preliminary plat is all of the holdings of the owner, because we want to see how we will eventually get everything working together. But then based on, market demand, we might see a final plat being a smaller area, might range. It might be around 30 units at a time. It might be more, it might be less. It just really kind of depends. And that's really been something that's been left up to the developer about the extent of what gets final platted. While we have gone through phasing plans when we talk about a preliminary plat to kind of know how it might generally follow, we don't have anything in the written in the code that really drives exactly how that happens. And of course, we want to keep some flexibility with the market. So that final plat step is what we're talking about tonight, about whether we make a revision to our ordinance on some concerns that we've seen with that. So the concerns that we have, or issues that we've experienced, is, like I said, there really isn't anything in our code that talks about the timing of the final plat phasing, or what I mean more is how those pieces happen together. As was pointed out at the last meeting, we have put a lot of attention at a preliminary plat to talk about how would this be phased. But of course, that's going to change over time, which I think was pointed out by some commissioners too, that over the span of the 5 to 10 years, or maybe even more, that development continues to be developed and things are the infrastructure is put in place. There's a lot of other changing conditions that end up happening too. So we're trying to keep that flexibility, yet also deal with the issues that might be coming up as we move through the development of an area. And so we've seen impacts of how a phasing plan might anticipate some initial things, but maybe we haven't anticipated everything. And we've had complaints in at least one situation where maybe one street is being overburdened a little bit. There's excess traffic, maybe there's speeding, there's safety concerns about people who live in that neighborhood. There's frustration about the issues. That type of thing. And so we're looking for a way that we might be able to propose a solution that might help try to deal with this a little bit more. The situation that was presented at the last meeting kind of pointed to an issue where we have traffic primarily that's accessed the developments of Prairie Winds and Prairie West using Eric Road. Lots of concerns about that road that we've heard from the neighbors there for many years. And also with the elementary school having developed, that's put even more people on that road network there. Certainly there's Arbor's Drive to the south also that connects, so there are 2 ways that people can go to the elementary school. But as we develop Prairie Winds and Prairie West, we're looking for those connections to happen. And so one of those was Ashworth there, that's in that red arrow pointing to the west. And then there was also talk back when these developments occurred about the eventual connection into Green Hill Road extension. So certainly there were connections anticipated, and really I think it comes down to the timing of that and whether we want to discuss how the city may want to be a little bit more involved in the timing of that. So what we're proposing tonight, what Karen went over, several solutions that there might be several text amendments that get proposed over the course of the next couple months, possibly, and even continuing to monitor the ordinance. But the first solution that we're wanting to talk about tonight and see if the Planning and Zoning Commission might make a recommendation is related to a standard about critical infrastructure connections. Critical roads, and so that while we still want to have the flexibility to see how things change over time, that's of benefit to both the city and the developer. We wanted to integrate a provision where there's some discretion for the city to be working with a developer on maybe choosing one final plat over another. Back to maybe this screen, the choice was that this area was final platted first. The choice could have been to final plat this, for example. So that's, there's still flexibility in those choices, and that's what we want to talk about. And so here on the screen and in the staff report is the proposed section for discussion tonight by the commission. This would be an amendment. This would be adding a section to section 20-100 of our subdivision code that would speak to critical connections and giving some discretion by the city to help make sure that those connections occur as timely as possible. So with that, I will turn it over to the commission. I went through that very briefly, but I know that Karen touched on a lot more at the last presentation, and I just wanted to refresh on that.
Great. Let me just check our attendees here. Is there anyone attending tonight who would like to make a comment on this proposal? If so, I would ask you to raise your hand on the Zoom call and I will recognize you. Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion and potentially a motion.
Last I recall from the previous meeting, we were going to look at some sample language from other communities that are facing similar growth opportunities and challenges or have faced similar situations that we now are. I move to table this until we see some of those examples.
Well, if you'd like, I could speak to that, or the commission can make a motion, either way.
Well,
what's your preference, Kyle? Is that you want to do that as a motion, or?
I'm not ready to withdraw my motion yet, but but we can continue to discuss it. I was hoping to see samples of the specific ordinance language used in other, at least one, if not other communities that have an apparent phasing language in their zoning ordinance.
So we have a motion to table it. I guess like the proper procedure, I guess I would ask if there's a second. We can continue discussion after if the motion is made. So I guess
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to table this item. Is there discussion? Questions?
So I can tell you a little bit about the research that staff has done if you would like. We did do research. We were not able to put anything in the packet because there's just a quick turnaround here, but we had a planner who reached out to Ames, Urbandale, Ankeny, Sioux City, Bettendorf, and Council Bluffs. And what we heard back was that while there wasn't specific language like critical connection type of language, Ames has language requiring commercial, industrial, multifamily subdivisions to have an integrated site plan with a development agreement. Urbandale requires phasing plans with the preliminary plat. So I guess that would indicate that you have to stick with that, and maybe there's no changes after that. I'm not sure. Sioux City's updating its subdivision regulations to require phasing plans, but they don't anticipate hard and fast language about timing. So some of those communities use development agreements about critical infrastructure. So I guess the point is that there's a variety of ways that people handle trying to make the critical connections that need to be there.
So go ahead.
Did you say that, I thought I read that this is consistent with our state code? Or is that, I did that.
Well, I guess maybe what you read was that the state code in terms of having minimum standards and having a subdivision code, yes, that these are areas that we can regulate and adopt community standards.
So I guess
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So I have a question. Well, the commission asked for this research, and so we didn't get to read it. I'm kind of concerned about that. And then the question I have is, if other cities handle it with development agreements, what caused our problem in this area that we're talking about, Prairie West and Prairie Wind or whatever it is? What did we not do as a city that enabled this to happen?
So both of these developments happened years ago, so I don't have firsthand knowledge, but what I can tell you from the research that I have is that preliminary plats for both of these subdivisions occurred in 2013. And I know that there was discussion, and the staff reports talked about connections. With the Prairie West preliminary plat, the connection was via Richard Road. However, there was discussion about Ironwood connecting to Green Hill. That was not part of the subdivision plat, so it was, it seems to me it was conveyed as, you know, that's a goal and that could happen in the future, and there had been discussions about it. I think that there are neighborhoods in that area that understood that was definitely going to happen right away or at some point very soon, and the city doesn't really have that control. So
I remember following some of those meetings pretty closely in 2013 and 14, and the land to the north where the Ironwood connection would occur was not originally part of that preliminary plat because it wasn't same ownership. It was a complete unknown. And so I think what happened 7 years ago is that everybody was working with the best of their ability at the time. And as I see it, I don't know that anything would have happened any differently. I don't see how it could have happened any differently. Private developers have no way to use eminent domain or make an abutting landowner sell to satisfy a critical connection. So my fear with this is that a blanket approach, could lead to some major obstacles that where developments wouldn't even really be viable to pursue. Similarly, where the school has only the one road connection, I'd like to point out that the school that kind of predates my involvement here, and I don't know what I don't recall specifically what process that plan went through with the commission, but in the private sector, you would never be able to build out in the middle of nowhere and presume someone else would make road connections.
Right.
And so those are some concerns I have about this. I think the idea, one of the, I believe Stephanie said it was maybe West Des Moines or Urbandale said they have a requirement to submit a phasing proposal with the preliminary plat. That on the surface sounds like it makes sense. And then as market demand, quote unquote, changes for better or for worse, the developer could then propose modifications to that phasing structure as additional phases are final platted. So a simple instrument like that, just identifying the need for a phasing proposal, again, on the surface, I think that makes sense. A lot of the language in this proposal is kind of vague, and that's why I would really like to see some of the specific language with what some of these other communities are doing, because obviously we're not the first ones to to have this come up.
So couple thoughts. I mean, I was on the commission when that, through all of that, and as I recall, I mean, there is a phasing plan submitted with those developments that took into account those connections. It was assumed that they would go one after the other, in a logical manner that would connect. But I think, Kyle, you mentioned at the last meeting, so one of the key connections that's missing in that area is the connection to Green Hill Road. But I think that ended up because the Green Hill Road extension had not been done, and that was part of the reason then that other final plats were approved. I guess I'm looking at this language as just trying to clarify a little bit more the intent of what we want to get out of the final plats. But I also think that as a commission and a city, we already have the power to control those phases by what we decide to approve for a final plat. You know, and we do ask for phasing in the preliminary phase and that type of thing. But I think what I'm reading into what they're doing is basically just trying to put a little bit more teeth into that's what we need to do, because ultimately it comes down to what plats final plats we approve. And to me, that phasing could be required. We don't have to approve a final plat if it doesn't have the type of phasing, that we think is important. So to me, it doesn't change our actual ability to do that. It just maybe tries to point it out and make it a little more obvious that that's an issue and that we need to try to address. Maybe I'm missing something, but that's what I got out of the language of the amendment. Am I off base on that, Stephanie? I mean, is there something that we're critically missing in the code right now? Because as far as I can tell, I mean, the city and the commission has the ability to, say, well, we won't pass this subdivision plat because it's flawed in terms of connection. Yes, you can propose that, but it's like, we're not the city staff doesn't have to recommend it and the commission doesn't have to pass it. So.
Well, the criteria for a final plat is substantial conformance with the preliminary plat.
Right.
So I don't know that we have as many teeth as you might be saying there. Does it conform? So that's our concern. So there can be the choice, like I mentioned, about which phase to do. Now, as you mentioned, Marty, you are absolutely correct. There was a phasing plan that was done with both of those subdivisions that focused on how were we going to get a second connection, when that was going to happen. And once the second connection happened, then there was no restriction on how it was phased at that point. So it was about getting Ironwood in and getting a second connection. So that second connection was Richard Road connecting to Ironwood, not Ironwood connecting to Green Hill Road. And I think that many people felt that when it was approved back in 2013, that perhaps the second connection meant Ironwood to Green Hill. I'm not sure, but that's the impression that I get, and feel that maybe that changed halfway through. Well,
and there is one kind of problem with that whole thing is that there is one other piece of property that's not included in it, which is at a key location for a potential other access to Hudson Road.
Are we talking about Ashworth, Marty?
Yeah, I believe it's Ashworth.
Now, what we had been conveying as staff is that then we did receive a preliminary plat for the connection of Ironwood to Green Hill. That occurred in August of 2018. Yet the road hasn't been built.
Say that again. I didn't track with that, Stephanie.
We received and we actually went through the commission. We approved a preliminary plat for Ironwood connection to Green Hill that happened in August of 2018.
Okay.
And we knew, as early as May of 17 that was coming through the process. So, we've been conveying to the community this connection's coming because we had been seeing information about it.
But then it didn't actually happen.
It hasn't happened yet.
I'm just wondering if maybe there needs to be more teeth in the preliminary plat phasing then, because once you get past that, they're kind of moving ahead with more detailed, development.
Which is why there was a lot of discussion with the West Fork development. I think that the commission knows that. You were pretty involved in talking about what those connections would be. So I think we've learned from situations and tried to apply that, up front too.
And if I recall, there was a phasing proposal that was pretty well thought through that was part of that submittal, was there not?
Yes. Just leaves it to be negotiated development by development. So one thing that was brought up is how to be fair across the board to every development.
So Kyle, is there in the language of this proposed amendment, is there things in there that you're
Well, there's a
unsure
word in
of?
there that says emphasize. Does emphasize mean that getting a phasing proposal with the preliminary plat submittal is what is meant by emphasizing, or does emphasizing mean that the city has the authority to supersede the developer's interests or anticipations of market demand and so forth, and could force a hand, so to speak. As far as I'm concerned, the city has the ability to put roads in at will. The Green Hill extension is a perfect example of that. We didn't dance around waiting for development to maybe happen to wait for a developer to put that road connection in on Green Hill. It got put in, and now that got put in, it spawns development around it. So it kind of goes both ways. And I feel like if the language is wrong, it could kind of get all of us in a habit of kind of sitting and waiting for someone else to go first, if that makes sense. So there's some vagueness to it that kind of gives me hesitation. And then, how is market demand? How is that defined? Who gets to define that? And I feel like a developer probably knows that better than anybody if they're willing to put their money on the line for it. And sometimes those things change, including the timing and that sort of thing. So it's kind of a sticky issue, but as far as making sure the due diligence is done, I'm very much supportive of something to make a standardized requirement of any preliminary plat that has more than one phase, having a phasing proposal submitted. And doesn't matter whether it's staff or the commission or the developer, nobody has a crystal ball and nobody has a magic wand. Everyone's going to have to do the best that they can at that moment in time. And as I look back, I don't really see what would have happened differently in the Prairie Winds and Prairie West phases that isn't only obvious in retrospect. Because early on, that land was, and I mentioned this at the last meeting, that land was estimated by David Sturch to be a 10+ year development, and it's proven to be more of a 7-year thing. And now there's a school, and then there's annexed land to the west, and then there's the additional ground to the north and the Green Hill extension. None of those things were but blips on the radar when this started. And so we kind of, I don't think we have a choice but to let things ride to an extent. But again, the idea of formally having a phasing proposal part of the preliminary plat submittal for anything that has more than one phase makes sense. Not that we're not already doing that, but some language to make sure that that is a formal line item, and that staff's allowed to have a section of criteria that they can include in that. I don't see any reason that doesn't make sense. But again, if other cities have done some of this, I think it'd be good for us to look at that.
So the proposed language, is this that item number 2, right, Stephanie?
Correct.
Stephanie, I have a question just about our existing conditions. I mean, we have phasing plans in the preliminary plats. If we see one of those, do we as a city or planning and zoning have any control to tell the developer which phase needs to go first now?
In the preliminary plat stage, we have been doing that. So, we did really work hard with the West Fork development about what that phasing should be, and making sure that there was a connection not only to 27th, but also to Union Road, and that the timing of that was paired pretty closely. We didn't drive it in terms of a date with that, although I think that the commission did talk about some dates related to the school, ultimately it stalled at city council related to dates being mentioned in the agreement. So did I answer your question or did I just ramble?
Well, I know in preliminary plats, but, you know, as Kyle said, everything changes, you know, and there are sometimes good reasons for that. So we have to use our judgment. But somebody comes in and has a 10-phase plat, and the last one connects the critical infrastructure that we want to see. Do we have any control over changing that at this point if we don't change any language?
It's gonna maybe depend on what it is. I guess in the case of West Fork, I'm gonna continue to use ones that developments we're familiar with that we've reviewed. I'm not meaning to pick on them. I'm just meaning to say we've recently talked about these, so we're probably familiar with the situation. In that case, there was a topography change where sewer service, you know, for part of the development comes from the north and the other part comes from the south. So that can be a driver in terms of timing of infrastructure too. So I don't want to pin it all on roads, although those end up being the important ones for the community and what people see the most. They don't recognize what's underground there. But that sewer part of it was a consideration and quite a bit of discussion that staff had with the developer and their team about the time, how the phasing would sequence and what would happen after each one. So we did spend quite a bit of time negotiating that and feel that we came to a good resolution and a good proposal, and you know, we were able to use our ordinance to move that. But we also had a rezoning happening at the same time. So when somebody's asking for an entitlement for property that doesn't have the services, we're able to pair it with that and you know, get what we need out of it. I think that some language about phasing plan with preliminary plat at a minimum is a good idea.
I guess
if the commission's not accepting this proposal tonight.
You know, in my view, I mean, the commission already and the city and already has that power. It's just, you don't, to Brad, to your question, it's like, what power do we have? Well, you don't pass it. I mean, you just say, hey, you know, as proposed, no, it's not meeting some fundamental, you know, requirements we think are necessary, and you don't pass it. What I'm looking at here is just some language that fleshes that out a little bit more. And I guess the question would, in my mind, would be, maybe this way this would be written. It says alternate phasing of a subdivision may be required to ensure timely connection of essential infrastructure. So may be required. I guess where's that requirement come from? I guess that may be the question. Whether or not said infrastructure is essential in nature shall be determined by the city. So, okay, I guess that's maybe the area where there could be some ambiguity, is what maybe what I'm hearing from you, Kyle. I don't know. Is that then the city? When we say the city, is that staff? Is that just in general the commission and city council, or maybe that's a little vague there.
Let me give you kind of an example, I guess. I think it's safe to say that we're largely in agreement that that the thought process and some sort of formal proposal for phasing needs to be part of the discussion. And with this this other development, when it went through the commission, I thought, based on previous lessons learned and insights and so on, that the phasing proposal made a lot of sense. So where I'm looking for clarity, if we want to have teeth, so to speak, is in being specific. So how is market demand defined? And if there's an actual timeline on when a piece of road has to go in, what's the penalty if it doesn't? I believe it was, this is predating me, but But I felt the effects of it, John Deere layoffs and that sort of thing. But I think it was 1984. There was one single family permit pulled, and that happened really quick. And so if things turned on us quick, economically, and there's this deadline that was approved to put $1 million road in, what happens then? Is there a lien put in place, or does the city put the road in and then sue the developer? Or I just wonder what happens in that scenario, and then who has the ability to decide then whether to let it ride or to really crack down and enforce it. And if we can't make those definitions clear, then I think it's unnecessary language. So start with what we can make clear and maybe build from there. So I agree, Stephanie. I think at a minimum that identifying some sort of formality in the submittal process and making a line item that gets clearly discussed. Not that we're not already doing that. I think everybody's done a great job of that. But making that formal would be a good first step, and something we could probably act on right away. As far as something with more teeth, I'd like to see some of that defined a little bit more clearly.
The proposed language does not have a timing where there's a date or anything, so I'm not sure the economic situation you mentioned that this language would trigger something, because there's no date related to this.
Right.
I just wanted to clarify that. Did I miss something, or?
No, that makes sense, and that's
Okay.
largely the way I read it too. But then, if it's not doing any of those things, then what is it doing exactly? I mean, de jure, we're actually doing that already, and so let's simplify it to make something that can be universally accepted. And if there are some alternative or more creative suggestions that empower all the people doing this work behind the scenes with better tools to work with, I think it would behoove us to look at some examples rather than try and recreate the wheel.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to looking at some examples, and I do think in my mind what it does is clarifies to the developer a power that really the city and our group has, and that it just isn't a free-for-all potentially, right? And that's challenging, and setting a rule in place for every development probably is going to be difficult. And we use it's probably vague on purpose, if I would guess, Stephanie, so that we can evaluate those things on a case-by-case basis. But from my end, it just clarifies for the developer that is the case, and that we have that power now.
Other discussion? Thoughts, questions?
I was listening to everything going on, and what I think is Kyle's motion to table it is, I'm in agreement with that. And I like Brad's idea. We really should see some other words from other areas too, so that we can make sure we're following good example, something that does have tooth. I don't want to, this city has done so much, and it's helped the developers because we're a progressive city. But by any means, I don't want to stop that development. And I don't want this to be a roadblock to do that. So I like Kyle's motion to just table it, and I'd like to see some examples also.
Stephanie, I assume there's no immediate time frame on this.
No.
Okay. Other discussion? Comments? Hearing none, I guess we'll go ahead and take a roll call vote on tabling this item for further discussion with the request I got this right, Kyle, for additional information and discussion at a later date. Is that,
If we're tabling, it would defer the item to the next meeting. And so if we have the material, then great. And then if we don't, we can table it again at the next meeting. So I think by tabling it, we'd just be making sure that we don't let it fizzle out. We'll make sure we bring it up at each meeting until we get somewhere with it.
that? So Stephanie, I'll ask you to take the roll call vote.
Okay, Hartley,
Aye.
Holst,
Aye.
Larson,
Aye.
Leeper,
Aye.
Lynch,
Aye.
Prideaux,
Aye.
Saul,
Aye.
Shred.
Aye.
All right, so that motion carries, so we'll table that. Stephanie, do you think it's reasonable that we might be able to do an update discussion on this at the next meeting, or is that going to be too quick for staff?
Too quick.
Okay.
We have to turn around and get packets done next week, so it'll
That's kind of
probably be the following or after.
Okay, thank you. Yep. So whenever you can get the update, then
Okay,
be ready, I guess. So that is our only item of old business tonight. We have one item of new business, and that's a zoning code text amendment for adaptive reuse of vacant institutional buildings. And if I got this right, I think, Chris, you're introducing this one tonight?
Yep, I got this.
Wow.
So back in March or April, we received a call from the owner of a church building that sits in the southeast part of town. As we understand it, a while back, the pastor of the church passed away, and the church has since sat vacant with very few options in terms of allowed land uses. It sits in the R1 residential zoning district, and they have only 4 realistic legal options. If we want to progress to the next slide. So it could continue to sit vacant, sell to another church, convert the use to a public or parochial school, or tear down and subdivide into residential lots. The owner of this property was hoping to use the property to host wedding receptions, which is already a commonly accepted activity under the umbrella of churches and religious institutions. However, without a religious institution, this use would be a principal commercial use that is prohibited by code, even in the R4 zone. It is important to note that institutional facilities are properties with unique characteristics. They are large buildings on large parcels, and they often have some historical or cultural value. It seems appropriate to cautiously provide flexibility of use while considering the neighborhood context. So back in April and May, when City Hall was closed to the public and most city staff were working from home, I had some time to dive into this issue, which involved reaching out to planners in other cities across Iowa. So I spoke with planners at Iowa City, Cedar Rapids, Des Moines, and Council Bluffs. And while a number of these planners indicated that they have encountered similar inquiries about repurposing obsolete institutional buildings, only Council Bluffs and Iowa City have pursued ordinance amendments. From these conversations, I'm convinced that we should not add alternative uses by right in the zoning code, but it makes sense to craft an amendment that provides alternatives that are subject to review and approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council. What we propose is that this be in the form of a conditional use permitting process that doesn't guarantee that a use is approved, but it may be granted by our judicial bodies if it appears appropriate to the neighborhood context. So what are the issues we need to consider in such a policy? First, not all uses are compatible with residential neighborhoods. The policy should likely limit the alternative uses that can be considered. Second, nuisance issues such as noise and traffic will be important to evaluate when considering alternative uses. Third, allowing allowing an opportunity for neighborhood input will be important in the review process. So giving notice to adjacent or nearby property owners should be required. And fourth, depending on the proposed use and the characteristics of the site, additional conditions may need to be imposed, such as additional parking, limits to hours of operation, restrictions on use of amplified sound, additional landscape screening and buffering to ensure compatibility with the neighborhood. So what uses are compatible and likely should qualify for consideration? So these are the ones that staff has identified. So hospitality-oriented uses such as retreat facilities, guest houses, commercial meeting halls and event facilities. Conversion to a multi-unit dwelling where the proposed number of units may not otherwise be allowed. And we actually have a church-turned multifamily example in Cedar Falls that was allowed by right as it was in an R4 zone. The church is pictured on the slide here. Is a building at 1404 Main Street that was converted to a 10-unit multifamily building in 2012. Other uses are community service uses like libraries, museums, senior centers, community centers, neighborhood centers, youth club facilities, social service facilities, and vocational training facilities for the physically or mentally disabled. Specialized educational facilities such as music schools, dramatic schools, dance studios, martial arts studios, language schools, and short-term examination preparation or preparatory schools. And then professional office uses such as accountants, lawyers, and architects, things that are low impact. So let's talk about criteria for evaluation. Each case should be considered on its own merits, and it makes sense to evaluate a use against the backdrop of the uses that were previously permitted. So churches and other institutional uses are not without traffic or noise. Some youth activities that go late, some have youth activities that go late into the evening. So we can ask questions such as, are the proposed hours of operation compatible with the neighborhood context? Will noise levels be at or below the levels produced by the previously permitted use or otherwise controlled in a manner that is compatible with residential living? Will traffic generated by the proposed use be similar or less than what was generated by the previously permitted use? Will the proposed use draw similar or lower numbers of people to the site than the previously permitted use? Will it draw large groups converging for a singular event, small groups, or maybe a constant stream of visitors? Will the frequency of activity be similar or less intense than the previously permitted use? Will it be every day, just weekends? Does the proposed use require any updates to parking or landscaping to address issues of neighborhood compatibility or compliance with current zoning standards? Is consideration warranted in order to preserve a building or site of historical or cultural value? What type of signage, if any, should be allowed? Is there neighborhood support for the proposal? Have neighborhood concerns been adequately addressed? So a lot of these questions will help identify conditions that the commission or the city council may want to impose. Depending on the evaluation of the proposed use, the Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council may approve a proposal, disapprove, or approve with conditions. So to provide more flexibility to repurpose defunct institutional uses within residential neighborhoods, staff recommends adding a conditional use process to the zoning ordinance. And staff recommends review and discussion of this proposal by the commission and recommends setting a date for public hearing on September 9th. If the commission is in favor of staff moving forward, staff will bring forward specific code language for consideration at the public hearing. And I guess it doesn't have to be September 9th. We could do the one after that, depending on the turnaround time, as has been noted with the previous text amendment that was presented.
All right, very good. Thank you, Chris. So what you're looking for tonight is a discussion and a recommendation on whether to go forward with actually proposing this, this concept.
Right.
So let me look here on our little list, see if we have any attendees who would like to comment on this proposed item. Any public comment, please signify by raising your hand on the Zoom attendees list. I see none, so I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion and a recommendation.
I think it sounds reasonable and something that looks like a lot of thought has been put into examining each one of these, and I would agree to do that. Bring it forward.
Yeah, I would. My feeling is this is a really good idea. There's a number of structures in Cedar Falls that could potentially benefit from this that are, former churches that are, now do not have that use, that are valuable structures or good structures that, we'd be remiss if we don't figure a way to repurpose them, rather than just tear downs. Is not beneficial to everybody to do that. So I think this is a really good idea, because I think there's a lot of those uses you suggested, Chris, in your report are very, very reasonable potential uses for, residential neighborhoods. I think you're looking at then all the residential districts, right? And kind of addressing that within all R1 through R4 districts.
Yes. Yep. And maybe to be more specific, it's something that we would probably put as a conditional use, kind of under the R1 residential district, which then would have the pyramid effect up through the residential districts.
Okay.
Chris, does the tax base change when you go from a church to a different type of organization, or does the tax base stay the same?
It could potentially, a church is a not-for-profit, so usually it's going to be tax exempt. It's probably going to depend on the organization. If it's a facility for weddings or whatnot, maybe they are able to structure that as a nonprofit, but if it's for residential, that might be tough to do.
Yeah, I would think if you convert it to residential or some sort of office use, it's going to end up being become a taxable entity at that point.
I agree with my fellow commissioners that this is a worthy thing to review. I would be curious to see some of the wording that some of these cities that you pointed out and how they develop the language.
Right.
Okay.
I think it looks really, really great too, and a lot of thought put into this. One kind of question or maybe clarification: what happens now as it sits?
What happens now, as in? Can you clarify the question?
Well, right now is it pretty much just a yes or no situation where it would be used by right and that's it, and this basically is enhancing with lots of other ideas and creative uses to keep a building in place? Is that the intent and the idea?
Correct. Yeah. At this point, church buildings are only given so many options. Either it's going to be some public or civic use, school or something like that, or they'd have to tear it down and repurpose to a single-family residential use,
or go through the variance process. Am I thinking about that right?
No, a variance wouldn't apply here. Those 4 criteria of economic hardship or unique topography, things like that, doesn't really apply to a use.
Yeah, the use is really limited right now if you're not for the church building itself. So, I think to Chris's point earlier, it's like there's only a couple things you can realistically do with those structures in that zoning. right now. And then, so this proposed type of language would give, the quite a few potential, it doesn't guarantee, you're not guaranteeing that you can do it, but it gives a lot more potential options for using that building, subject to a pretty tight review and approval process, which I think is a pretty laudable goal in my
Yeah,
mind.
that makes a lot of good sense.
Yeah.
Historic preservation or historical cultural significance is mentioned a couple of times. I would be curious, is that going to be like a requirement or just something that would be considered?
Not a requirement, but something that would be considered. It certainly would be looked upon favorably if it's a building of historical significance.
I personally like the flexibility that gives the commission and the city, because this change could be good or it could be bad. So I think it's good. And I think I heard Leanne give a motion earlier. If she did, I would second it. If she didn't, I will give a motion to approve the recommendation of staff.
Do we have a motion from you, Leanne? Is that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further discussion?
What's the timeline on this one?
We'll try to turn it around pretty quick. I mentioned the 9th of September. If we can have the language ready by that point, I mean, that's
Start the review process.
Set that as the date of public hearing.
Any other discussion? Hearing none. Stephanie, we'll ask you to call the roll.
All right. I'm going to go backwards this time. Saul,
Yes. Aye.
Joe,
Aye.
Lynch.
Aye.
I think I missed somebody. Shred.
Yes, you did miss.
It fell off my sheet of paper here. Leaper,
Aye.
Larson,
Aye.
Holst,
Aye.
Hartley.
Aye.
So that motion carries. So get to work, Chris, I guess, is the one on that. Okay, I think that is all of our regular business. Stephanie, are there any commission updates for tonight?
I have no updates. Thank you.
Updates. We're continuing on our Zoomathon for the
Correct.
foreseeable future.
Yes.
Okay. So, and our next meeting is September 9th. So
Correct.
with that, if there's no other business, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there
Second.
a second? No second?
Who seconded that? Somebody did.
Okay, we have a second. All in favor signify by aye.
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 We're adjourned. Well, thank you, everybody. We look forward to seeing everybody on the 9th of September.